You can sit here if you want
Yeah.
to.
No, this is fine.
Okay.
There we go. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, good. I appreciate the opportunity for Arrow to let me do some presentations. Kayla called me actually a couple of months ago and found out that I was doing presentations at my home base here at the township in Battlefield, Missouri. And she asked me if I'd be interested in doing something for the Arrow community, and I told her I most certainly would. I was kind of like an old fire horse. You know, when you hear the bell ringing, you know, you run to the harnesses thinking you're supposed to still pull the fire truck.
See about that. You get over here so he can see that you're here.
I'm an old history teacher of 38 years, and I really feel like that there's a real need to study history, even at our age. In fact, I always used to say that history was wasted on the youth of America. I thought it ought to be being taught to people of my age now, in my 70s and older. She asked me what I would be interested in teaching, and I told her I would think about it. And I got back with her and told her, I said, you know, I think I'm going to teach about the American West. And I'll tell you why. Number one, I grew up with it. You know, I grew up watching all these old TV shows and TV movies with Lash LaRue and all these other old time Western stars. And I've always had a passion for it. But more than that, you know, right now we're at a time in America when there's a lot of disunity and a lot of loud voices on both sides of the political spectrum. And I think we're all trying to figure out what it means right now to be an American. And most historians will tell you that we became Americans in the 19th century during the period of time and opening the American West. So that's the reason I chose this subject. I felt like it was important right now. I feel like it's something that would benefit us all. So with that being said, let me go ahead and do my screen sharing here. And get my presentation up. There we go, hopefully. Okay, so we're going to start a series of presentations on the American West. And again, my name is Tony Stevenson. I'm from outside Springfield, Missouri, Battlefield, Missouri. And I always like to start my presentations off with a series of paintings. And this is a real good one here. This is called Westward, the Course of Empire Takes Its Way by Emanuel Lutz. It sits inside the United States Capitol building. It's actually a 20 by 30 foot mural, and it's probably one of the more accurate demonstrations of manifest destiny, which is a term we're going to find out about here in a few minutes. So let's go on here. Now, today we're going to talk about the big ideas. Eventually, we're going to get into, you know, talking about the Native Americans, about the settlement of the West, about what we call the Wild West, and many of those areas. But today, at least, we're going to kind of set the framework for the whole presentations that are going to be going on for this winter. There's four terms that are often used in the history of the American West. One of them is the heroic age. Another one is the romanticism. Another one is the frontier theory. And finally, we have the term manifest destiny. So let's look at each one of these real briefly, and we'll kind of see how they pertain to the study of the American West. First of all, heroic age. During the 19th century, America went through something that has often been termed our heroic age. So what does that mean? Well, it means it's a generation of superior beings performing extraordinary feats of skill and courage, historically documented by long epic poems. Put it down in vernacular, it means it's a period where larger than life characters were doing larger than life things. How many of us haven't heard about Kit Carson and Lewis and Clark and Wild Bill Hickok and Wyatt Earp and Sitting Bull and Custer. These were just bigger than life characters, and they did bigger than life exploits. And as a result, this is generally classified as our heroic age. This isn't anything new. Every generation, every culture, civilizations had a heroic age. For instance, Greece, they had theirs. It was documented by the Odyssey and the Iliad by Homer. Rome had its heroic age. It was basically told through the story of Aeneid by Virgil. All these were long epic poems. England had the Arthurian legends. Germany, the Song of the Nibelungs, where we told about the history of Siegfried, who basically started the Germanic state as we know it. And then France had the Song of Roland, which was a long epic poem that was written about the time of Charlemagne. And finally, Spain had theirs called the Cid or El Cid. And it was basically a long epic poem where it told about the reconquest of Spain from the Moorish infidels. So, where's America's epic poem? Well, we've had them. Longfellow wrote one called Hiawatha, but really, that's not how we remember our heroic age. We remember our heroic age by TV westerns. Just think about this, folks. In 1959, there were 30 Western TV shows on TV. There was only 3 channels, NBC, ABC, CBS. So, you know, we didn't have the thousands of channels out there like we've got today. There were only 3, and you had to get them by rabbit ears or an antenna. And 30 of the shows at nighttime were Western shows. No wonder these things imprinted on my mind. I mean, that's all I grew up with, watching these old shows. Think about it. Wagon Train, you know, Ward Bond, you know, Bonanza, the Cartwrights, Defending the Ponderosa Against All Things. And then you had Wyatt Earp roaming around, doing good. You had Gunsmoke, of course, for 20-some years with Matt Dillon and Miss Kitty and Doc and Festus and, you know, Chester. It was just, you know, something that really set on our minds. My personal favorite, one of them anyway, is Steve McQueen, the King of Cool. Wanted Dead or Alive, the bounty hunter. And then, of course, who can forget Clint Eastwood in the Rawhide, you know, where he drove the cattle up north on the cattle drives. Every week we watched these, and they imprinted on our minds. So, in addition to the heroic age, there was something going on in America at this time called the Romantic era. Now, I'm not talking about The Bachelor, and I'm not talking about, you know, one of these soap operas, Days of Our Lives or anything. I'm talking about a period of time. Let me get going here. There we go. I'm talking about a period of time in art and literature that was characterized by certain things. And what they were characterized was this. First of all, it was a reaction to the previous century called the Enlightenment or the Age of Reason. Well, the 19th century people didn't buy into this very much. They wanted to return to a different time and a different period, and their art and their literature reflects this. So what they did, they stressed the importance of nature and isolationism. They said, it's really important that we get back to nature. It's really important that we do this alone. You know, they were kind of reacting to the industrial age, which was starting to go on, and the migration to the big cities. They said it's important that we express our feelings and our imagination. Up to this time, during the Enlightenment, the Age of Reason, feelings had kind of gone away, and they said, no, we need to bring this back. So they began to write and to produce art that reflected this. We almost went back to a medieval concept of chivalry, where men treated women and children with almost like a knighthood type thing. and they elevated the achievements of the heroic individual to larger than life heights. And again, I just mentioned some of these guys like Kit Carson and Wild Bill Hickok. These guys were just bigger than life. And in all honesty, sometimes they did bigger than life things, as you'll find out if you stay with me during the next series of presentations. In addition to this was a rise of nationalism and patriotism. This was a period of time in America when we really waved the flag a lot. Now, in addition to all this, you had writers, people like James Fenimore Cooper. Nobody reads Cooper anymore. I think it's a shame. He wrote great books. Henry David Thoreau. You had a group of poets called the Fireside Poets, like Longfellow and William Cullen Bryant, John Greenleaf Whittier. They all popularized this view of the West that we just talked about here. And then you had a group of painters known as the Hudson River School. Some of them were Albert Bierstadt, Thomas Moran, Frederick Remington. They all went west, and they all painted scenes of the Western landscape. They made sculptures of the cowboys and the Indians, and it really kind of solidified our whole concept of the American West. Now, anybody want to guess who America's first romantic era hero was? I asked this when I was presenting this a couple of weeks ago here at my home base, and I got all sorts of answers. Well, here's who it was. Anybody recognize Natty Bumppo, the last of the Mohicans? James Fenimore Cooper's book was really the beginning of the American heroic era as far as creating the hero. He wrote a series of books called Leatherstocking Tales. And Natty Bumppo, I'll show you a picture there from the movie. He was a heroic, virtuous, skillful frontiersman who had a love of nature and treated women chivalrously. I can't even say that word. Chivalry, I can't say it, with chivalry. How's that? Okay. So it was a really good book. If you've never read it, if you're interested in reading books, I would encourage you to do it. It really reads well, even today, even though it's a couple of 100 years old. Now, remember this guy? Have Gun Will Travel. Richard Boone. Did you ever think about how this show was created? Anybody out there remember the Richard Boone's character's name? Name was Paladin. What is a paladin? A paladin is a knight renowned for heroism and chivalry. Folks, the guy that wrote this series pulled it right out of Sir Walter Scott's book, Ivanhoe. Ivanhoe is about a black knight who was actually Richard I, and he was always coming incognito and doing good and trying to save the people that were being, taken advantage of. That's Richard Boone's character in the TV series. He was actually a wealthy lawyer who lived in San Francisco in a hotel. He was urbanized. He was, sophisticated. He was a chess master. But when he got the call, he put on his black armor and he went out and he took care of evil. This is straight out of Ivanhoe. Even his name was a knight. Look at the theme song. I'm not going to sing it because you could all turn off, okay? Have Gun Will Travel reach the heart of a man, a knight without armor in a savage land. His fast gun for hire heeds the calling wind. A soldier of fortune is the man called Paladin. So, TV Westerns had their romantic era heroes as well. The third leg, the third theme that we need to talk about today, the frontier theory. Now, we all know what a frontier is, but in 1893, a man by the name of Fredrick Jackson Threr, he was a young historian, just getting started teaching in college. He came to a big convention in Chicago and presented a paper that no one listened to. And he said, the frontiers had a really important impact upon America. And he said, here's how. And he said, there's three reasons the frontiers really impacted this country. Number one, he said that the empire basically, the frontier basically had disappeared by 1890. He said, what we have been going through for the last 100 years in America, from about 1790 to about 1890, was the opening up of the frontier. And he said, this is gone now. And indeed, the census said that. So that wasn't anything unusual. The second thing he said was, he said, the frontiers had a really big impact upon America because it served as our safety valve. He said, what's happened in Europe, and if you know anything about 19th century European history, it was an era of total revolutions. Marx wrote his Communist Manifesto. There was revolutions going on all over Europe. And, political monarchs and kings and queens and were just being thrown out right and left. People were fed up in Europe because they couldn't get land. That's why they were coming to America. And he said, we escaped all that because the frontier has served as our safety valve. We did not have to go through all this political upheaval. Now, his critics would say, you kind of forgot about the Civil War. Well, that's true and it's not true, because it's true that that was a big political upheaval, to say the least. It's also not true in that it didn't have anything to do with land as such. It had to do more with political ideas and, of course, slavery. But this is an important thing. Think about this. If the frontier closed in 1890, then, have we had a safety valve for the last 120, 130 years? It's something to think about. But most importantly, and this was his big idea, he said, we have been forged into a new kind of people. Prior to this, the prevailing thought was that America was nothing more than a transplanted European civilization, that we had just brought England and France and all these other countries from Europe over to America, and we were acting and behaving just like they were. And he said, that's not true. We're different. And the reason we're different is because the frontier has made us different. So here's Turner, picture of the young historian who went on to have a very good career. And these are the characteristics that he said were important. He said, first of all, Americans are strong. He said, not to say that Europeans are weak, but we are even stronger. We have a strength of character about us that these countries do not have anymore. He also said that we believe in equality and fairness. And yes, I know there's a lot of vocal groups right now screaming that there's no fairness, there's no equality in life. And indeed, there are some inequalities in this country and always have been and probably always will be. But way down deep, I think most of us really do believe in the concept of equality and fairness for human beings. I think that we believe every person deserves the opportunity to make something out of their life, regardless of their race, their color, their creed, their religious viewpoint. All we ask is that we be treated in that same equality and fairness. And, it's a tough experience for a lot of people. But I think what Turner was saying was that the majority of people in this country believe in the concepts of the Declaration of Independence. Number 3, we're determined, we're optimistic. We look at the glass half full. A lot of countries in this world look at the glass a long ways empty, and they have a reason to, there's no doubt about it. But this is a characteristic that we have always been optimistic. We're always waiting for the sun to shine the next day. I know right now this is a tough time to be optimistic. I struggle with it just like everyone else does. I haven't been to a grocery store since March the 8th, and it's absolutely driving me crazy. My wife hasn't been shopping since March the 8th, and I think she's probably going to commit homicide on me if I don't get her to a store someday soon. So, it's hard to be optimistic, but, every day I wake up thinking, okay, this is going to be a better day. Things are going to get better. Things are progressing. And indeed, I hope that they are. Number 4, we're ingenious, we're inventive. We don't take no for an answer. If something confronts us that we can't conquer, we will break down every barrier to try to invent something or try to create a method by which we can overcome that difficulty. I mean, look right now what's going on. We are doing everything we can to come up with the solution to this COVID. And I think we will. And I think it will happen pretty shortly. Think about World War II. Look at what happened. We absolutely just created a whole mechanization program that completely overwhelmed the Germans and the Japanese and the Italians and the other Axis powers. We were just able to go in and just completely, overwhelm them with our ingeniousness, our inventiveness. Number 5, we're kind of an informal people. We don't really care too much about what piece of silverware goes on what side of the plate. We're just a little bit more concerned about what kind of food is inside the plate. We just don't really care very much about the normal conventions of etiquette and all. Not that we're not, sophisticated people. It's just that we're pretty much more an informal type people. We have a certain ruggedness about it, and that's not always appreciated by other countries. 6, the American character has a certain degree of righteousness about them. Now, a lot of people would not agree with this, but I think most Americans think that maybe God's sun is shining just a little bit brighter on America than it is other countries of the world. I think they think that we are enjoying the fruits of our belief, and that, we are just have a little bit more causes of righteousness than other countries do. Like I said, a lot of countries probably don't believe this. I know they don't believe this, but I think most Americans kind of feel this way about themselves. And that's something that each one of us has to decide. And number 7, we don't beat around the bush a lot. We're pretty direct. We're pretty honest. We just say what's on our mind. And sometimes it gets us in trouble. I know it's gotten me in trouble lots of times in my life. I'm not always the most subtle person. I sometimes just come out and say what I feel. And the result is sometimes it doesn't go over well, but in the long run, I think most of us appreciate a certain amount of honesty and directness. This is what Turner was saying. Fredrick Jackson Threr said, this is the character of America. We have changed. We are no longer European. And not everybody brought into this. In fact, the case, this took a long time to kind of catch on. And if it wouldn't have been for a couple of people like Theodore Roosevelt and Woodrow Wilson, who happened to be Turner's college professor, one of his professors, I'm not for sure it ever would have caught on. But all of a sudden, about 10 years after he presented this paper, this became holy writ amongst historians. And it pretty much has been that way ever since. Historians generally buy into the Turner thesis about the frontier. And what he said was, well, we've all become Daniel Boone. We've all become this rugged frontiersman with all these characteristics that we associate with people like Daniel Boone. Now, I don't feel very much like a rugged frontiersman anymore, but I think I've still got some of the characteristics. I think I'd like to be a rugged frontiersman, but unfortunately, life doesn't always happen that way anymore. Finally, the last term, manifest destiny. This is a term that every one of us have heard probably at one time or the other in our lifetime. And we've probably got a general concept of what it means. It's a term that's used to justify the continual movement westward, which resulted in the expansion of America from the Atlantic to the Pacific Ocean. We occupied a very small sliver of land prior to 1800. By 1900, we had occupied what basically now know as the 48 contiguous states of America. Not all of them were states yet. There were a few left, like Arizona and Oklahoma. And of course, eventually we added Alaska and Hawaii. But for the most part, we had moved totally from a very small sliver of land along the Atlantic Ocean clear across the country and absorbed all this land. Now, that didn't come easy, okay, as we're going to find out here in a few minutes. The term was coined by a man by the name of John O'Sullivan. He was a journalist, and he used it to explain America's thirst for onward and Western expansion. There were a lot of political leaders who were really champions of Manifest Destiny. You're going to hear more about these as we go, particularly the first one, Thomas Hart Benton. He happened to be a senator from my home state of Missouri, and he was one of the most powerful figures in the first half of the 19th century. Henry Clay, who probably should have been president about 3 different times, but fate didn't work out for him. Different things just happened, and he never got elected president, but he probably should have been president several different times. And finally, President James Polk, who was president during the Mexican-American War, which was probably the point in time when Manifest Destiny most certainly showed its colors. Now, you can look at Manifest Destiny from a spiritual point of view, a religious movement, or you can look at it from a nationalistic point of view. More commonly, we see it as both. Here's Senator Thomas Hart Benton, and we're going to hear a whole lot more about him and his son-in-law, John C. Fremont, as we go along. So, religious movement. Well, it was used as a movement. It was defined as a movement to expand to the West. We said it was divine providence that America be spread over the entire continent. We said God intended us to occupy this land. Now, I'm not for sure everybody would have agreed with that. I know not everybody agreed with it. If you were a Native American, you most certainly did not agree with it. But, there was we said for the most part in this country, it was divine providence. God intended us to spread our influence and to absorb this land. And one of the reasons was because we had a burden to do it. The Bible says we're supposed to be missionaries. We're supposed to bring Christianity to all the parts of the world. And indeed, this is something that's been referred to as the white man's burden. We felt it was our destiny, our obligation to spread Christianity. Again, I'm not for sure everybody would have accepted that. I know they didn't accept it, and that caused some problems, as we'll see as we go along. Another painting, American Progress by John Gast. Look at this. You've got the angel. She's flying along in the air, holding a Bible in her right hand, stringing a telegraph wire for her left hand. You've got down in the lower right-hand corner, you've got the settlers plowing the field, you've got the stagecoach running, you've got the railroad coming along, you've got the wagon train, you've got prospectors, and look out to the west, look out to your left. You've got the Indians and the buffalo and the wild creatures running away from us. We are headed out to the west to bring Manifest Destiny to our country. Okay. Now, it can also be seen as a nationalistic movement. People said it was just inevitable that America dominate the continent. Now, you can argue about that. You can say that's not true. But folks, somebody was going to do it. It was either going to be the Spanish, or then again, the Mexican after they kicked the Spanish out of Mexico. It was going to be the British, or it was going to be the French, or it was going to be the Russians who were coming down from the coast of Alaska. It was going to be somebody that was going to take this land over. there was no way the Native American was going to be able to resist the influx of people crossing over this country. And they knew this. When the chiefs, after they were basically subjected, they would be brought back to Washington, D.C. sometimes to meet the Great Father, as it was called, the president. And they went back to their people and they said, you know, folks, there's no way. They are too big, they're too powerful, they have too much. There is no way that we can resist them. They tried, and it had very bad consequences for them. But this was, you know, this was something that people felt. It was just inevitable it was going to happen. They said, people said it was our destiny to extend liberty and freedom over the continent. Now, I can guarantee you the Native Americans would have argued about this. They said, hey, we're pretty free and we have a whole lot of liberty. And they did. It was something that, you know, kind of hard to stomach in times. We also said, look at all this land out here, all this resources there for our use. Remember, we're going through the Industrial Revolution right now. At the same period of time all this was going on, we're participating in the Industrial Revolution, which requires natural resources. So these resources were out there. And finally, and this is an argument that still resonates in this country today, we said we have a necessity for security and securing our natural borders. Said if we don't secure our natural borders, then somebody is going to take this land over from us. Excuse me, while I get a drink here. Pardon me. And indeed, that was true. There's no doubt about it. Think about it. This is still a big argument going on right now in this country. There is a tremendous political disagreement about what we should do about our borders. One side says we need to secure them totally. The other side says, no, we need to have open borders. It's an argument that hasn't been settled and may not be settled for some time. Immigrants Crossing Plains by Albert Bierstadt, a good representation of nationalistic manifest destiny. Look here, the sun shining, beckoning us westward. Come on, immigrants, cross over, take this land. Now, manifest destiny had its dark side. It wasn't always pretty. In that case, it was pretty ugly at times. We had to confiscate the land from the indigenous peoples, the Native Americans. So this was pretty bad. Mass confinement of the Indians into reservations. Pardon me, I've got another frog in my throat. We created reservations to move the Indians into. Some of it was the worst land in the West. They weren't POW camps, but folks, they weren't far removed from it. It was pretty bad. It was pretty ugly. Destruction of tribal organizations. We decided that we had to make the American Indian assimilate into our civilization. And the only way we could do that was take the Indian out of the Indian. That was the terminology that was used. And we did everything we could to destroy their old tribal ways. Destruction, full-blown genocide of some tribes. We didn't do this. We didn't just go out and kill every Indian we could find. I mean, there were instances where that happened, but mostly we did this through disease. Most of the time we did it through, taking disease and putting disease into the Indian tribes, not only by accident, but usually by accident. Things like measles, smallpox. Environmental destruction of much of the natural landscape and resources. We just absolutely destroyed some of the resources. Am I still connected up out there?
Yes, you're doing just fine.
Okay, I just wanted to, my my little, thumbnails kind of went blank there for a second. Okay. We saw scenes like this: spotted elk or Bigfoot at Wounded Knee. Not a very pretty sight, to say the least. Frozen in the snow after being massacred at the Battle of Wounded Knee, or the massacre at Wounded Knee in 1891. We just totally tore the land apart, as seen here in Montana at one of the copper mines. We destroyed whole groups of animals, the buffalo. Folks, in 1800, they estimate there were 20 to 30 million buffalo running around the American plains. There were people that reported seeing buffalo herds that lasted for days on end, passing by. There were groups of wolves. I was just reading something the other night where a guy reported seeing during the 1800s a group of wolves early on in a mountain man that he estimated to be anywhere from 30 to 40,000 as a group. Folks, these animals were almost gone by the end of the 1800s. In 1880, it's been estimated there were only 1,500 to 2,000 buffalo still in existence in America, from 20 to 30 million, some 80 years prior. And this was not by accident, as you're going to find out. We sent teams of buffalo hunters out to slaughter the buffalo because we knew that that was the only way that we could keep the Native American subdued, is by destroying his lifestyle. And it depended totally upon the buffalo in the plains area. So, coming down to the conclusion, here's one of the problems with studying the American West. There is a lot of mythology in the American West. This Romantic era that we talked about earlier really created a lot of myths about these people. And so it's really hard for us to really come clear exactly what happens sometimes. So it's hard for us to separate reality from legend. That's one of my goals during these series of presentations, is try to present you with the facts as opposed to the mythology. Sometimes it goes against what we've always heard. But, in a movie back in 1962 by the name of Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, John Ford, the director, had a line in there toward the end of the movie. He said, "When the legend becomes fact, you print the legend." Well, that created a whole lot of problems for the study of the American West, because the legend really became fact in a lot of our minds. And a lot of things we grew up hearing about and thinking was true ended up not necessarily being true. So, for instance, let's play a little game here and then we'll end. Legend or fact? Anybody know who this is? This is Geronimo, the great Apache war chief. You think this is fact or legend? Geronimo's real name was One Who Yawns. You think that was his real name, or you think his name was Geronimo? Well, I'll tell you, his real name was One Who Yawns. Geronimo was the name we gave him. That was not his name. His name was One Who Yawns. Can you imagine? Doesn't sound very fierce, does it? When you think about an Apache war chief by the name of One Who Yawns, it doesn't exactly create a sense of fear in our minds. Here's another one. Meriwether Lewis. Meriwether Lewis, Lewis and Clark went thousands of miles, were gone 2.5 years. They were, faced all sorts of terrible situations. Would it surprise you to know that he was the only person injured during this whole trek in 2.5 years? Not one of the members of the team was injured. And what's funny is how he was injured. He was almost back home. He was in Missouri, back in Missouri on the Missouri River. And they stopped one night and Lewis had to answer the call to nature out in the bushes. And one of the members were hunting for elk and saw something white flash in the bushes, thought it was an elk, and shot Meriwether Lewis in the behind. Did some pretty serious damage to him. But again, that's fact. That's not legend. Fact or legend? Look what she's holding there, the statue, a yellow rose. Who hasn't heard of the yellow song, the Yellow Rose of Texas? Did you ever stop to think about what the Yellow Rose of Texas was written about? Let me ask you, you think this is what it was written about? The Yellow Rose of Texas was a tribute to a mixed race girl who kept Santa Ana occupied while Sam Houston routed his troops at the Battle of San Jacinto. Well, it's fact. What we don't know for sure is whether or not she was sent there to do that or it just happened. But what we know is this: indeed, Santa Ana was occupied in his tent, and he had given word to all of his lieutenants that he was not to be disturbed for any reason. And it just so happened that right at that moment is when Sam Houston attacked the Mexican troops at the Battle of San Jacinto and totally routed the Mexican army, which was quite a bit larger. So that's a fact. Legend or fact? If you were to go to the University of Kansas and see this horse, he is actually in the museum. He's stuffed and he's mounted. His name is Comanche. You think Comanche was a survivor of Custer's last battle, the last stand of the Battle of Little Bighorn? Well, he was. In fact, he is the only survivor of Custer's defeat at the Battle of the Little Bighorn. Every other member of his group there out on the Battle of the Little Bighorn was destroyed. All the horses were killed either by the troops or they were taken by the Sioux Nation. This is the only known survivor of the actual battle. He was found about 3 days later. They knew who he was by the markings on him, the soldiers that found him that came to Custer's rescue too late. But they took him and they made him kind of a pet of the 7th Cavalry. And they gave this horse, when he finally died, they gave him a military funeral. There's only been 2 horses in the history of the United States that's ever been given a military hero. One of them was Black Jack Pershing's horse, and this horse. And he is now a hero and stuffed and mounted at the University of Kansas. Fact or legend? Billy the Kid. We all know about Billy the Kid. He killed 21 men by the time he was 21, blah, 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 blah. Would it surprise you to know that his real name was Henry McCarty, and he lived his early years in New York City? That's exactly what happened, folks. His mom moved him out first to Kansas, then to New Mexico, and he took on various names: William Bonney, Atram, etc., finally being known as Billy the Kid. But his real name was Henry McCarty, a slum kid from New York City. And finally, fact or legend? Wyatt Earp, greatest lawman of the West, man who stood for honor, dignity, right and wrong. After all, who remembers Hugh O'Brien? He was just, the epitome of honesty and decency. Would it surprise you to know that Wyatt Earp actually supplemented his lawman salary by running a brothel? It wasn't that uncommon, folks, back in those days for lawmen to be kind of on both sides of the law sometimes, and Wyatt Earp was no exception. So, this is the end of my first presentation. I hope that some of you will rejoin me. Next week, we're going to kind of take a virtual tour of the West. We're going to look at some of the visual sites of the West because geography plays a really important part. And then we're going to talk about Indian tribes, the early explorers, Lewis and Clark. We're going to talk about the Mountain Men era and the Trailblazers. We're going to take a period of time and look at artists and photography. We'll move on to Texas and the Alamo. We'll talk about the Oregon Trail and the Gold Rush and the railroad. And then we'll get into what's called the Wild West period, the cowboy era, the gunfighter area. We'll talk about Billy the Kid and Hickok and Jesse James and Wyatt Earp. And then we'll finish up talking about the Indian Wars, which basically ended the, the Western, the rise of the American West we know it, and finish talking about Buffalo Bill Cody and the actual end of the West and the kind of transition into the modern period. I always recommend a book and a movie at the end of my presentations. If you're interested, if you're a reader, there's a really good book called Dreams of El Dorado by H.W. Brands that's out. And a movie I'd recommend that really explores this period of time is called The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance. It's a very good movie, got John Wayne and Jimmy Stewart. So, folks, that's my first presentation. And I've lost my visual. I don't have any visuals at all out there. There I am. Okay. Okay. So I appreciate this opportunity. I hope that we have some people with us next week. I think it'll get more enjoyable as we go along and we get into some of these subjects, but we needed to kind of cover the big ideas today. So I appreciate it. I thank you. And I'll see you next week about 2:30.
Thank you, Tony. That was fantastic. And I will say I'm excited about the cowboy era. I think that's probably one of my favorite parts of history. So I love that. So thank you so much. And thank you everybody for tuning in. And that will go ahead and conclude our virtual events for today. And I will see you back again tomorrow. So have a lovely evening and we'll see you tomorrow.